Ruby Rose, Weiss Schnee, Blake Belladonna, and Yang Xiaolong. These 4 girls make up the Team RWBY, of which the show is named after. So why do we spend so much time focusing on Jean, Crow, and Oscar? This show has 4 main characters, and yet our attention is constantly being pulled away from them to put the spotlight on the supporting cast. While it is a good idea to flesh out your side characters, it's gotten to the point that some of them get more focus than our main girls. Team RWBY gets limited screen time to accommodate for the lengthy character building, lore dumping, and expositing dedicated to the supporting cast. These 3 have slowly been encroaching upon the center stage since the beginning of the show, and I think it's a good idea to look at the ramifications of focusing so much on these impostor protagonists. Jean has been creeping his way into the spotlight for the longest time. At first, he was just an eccentric supporting character, a friend for Ruby to turn to when she felt lost on her first day at Beacon. He supported her in their conversation, and faded back into the background once the main team was back on screen. Cutting back to him and Pyrrha in the forest was fine, as the whole cast were involved in some way, and we needed to establish him and his team. Can't just throw B characters at us without setup. However, it all began with his 2-episode arc. Over the course of 4 weeks, Jean took center stage, while Team RWBY only made minor appearances. I thought the show was called RWBY, not Juniper. A message the writers have stated to make sure they keep in mind, but I'm not too sure about that. So Pyrrha was given a lot of screen time in volumes 2 and 3, so her death would matter more. I could almost call her an impostor protag too, but she's not really around to steal a show anymore. However, the problem with this is that her whole character revolved around Jean. Since Pyrrha was our focus, that meant Jean was too. Her being heartbroken over Jean asking Weiss to the dance, the 2 talking on the balcony, Jean having a heart-to-heart with Neptune, him cross-dressing for her, Juniper's dance number. We barely see Weiss, Blake, or Yang during the dance while our focus is pulled into Pyrrha and Jean's relationship. And this only gets worse as, during the volume finale, Jean gets a whole extended scene to kill an Ursa as the rest of the humongous cast only gets a few seconds to show off their fighting before Coffee shows up. By the halfway point of Volume 3, Pyrrha has learned about the maidens, and the story puts her at the center. Team RWBY? Relegated to the background, literally sidelined to give Pyrrha the stage. And as we all know, if Pyrrha's on stage, so is Jean. These 2 steal the show for the entire second half of the volume. Team RWBY and the throwaway background characters scrabble around to fill time between large story beats like Amber's death and Pyrrha's stand against Cinder. While the rest of their team are stuck fighting paladins with the nobodies, Pyrrha and Jean are active in the main plot. Even though Pyrrha's death was so important, they never once show us how it's affected anyone but Jean. All her other friends or teammates? Her parents? No. Pyrrha died so Jean exclusively could be sad about it. Jean spends all of Volume 4 brooding over her death, upgrading his armor with hers, training in the forest at night, having an outburst at Crow. Jean gets these extra moments while RWBY has to just sit in the background and watch. The fact Jean is our focus so often is why smaller things stand out so much. Of course Jean's the only one Tyrion's interested in. Of course Jean got a weapon upgrade and is the first one to do significant damage to the Nukkalavi. And once again, most of the Volume 5 finale revolves around him. Even though Cinder has a hate boner for RWBY, Jean gets to have a breakdown and fight her off. Even though she's a maiden and was able to defeat Jean's mentor Pyrrha, Jean holds his own against her without taking any significant damage. Cinder ignores her hate crush RWBY, as she lies on the floor helpless, to instead stab Jean's other love interest, Weiss, even though Cinder shouldn't know he was interested in her before. Jean's semblance gets to save Weiss's life in a big moment with a buttload of build-up, ultimately playing a major role in the kids' victory. He healed Weiss and she was the best at holding off Hazel. This is why people call Jean Miles' self-insert. He's treated like the focus of the show so often that it actively steals the spotlight from Team RWBY. While the rest of his team are relegated to comic relief, Jean's the only one written to have nuance or depth. He's the only one with clear motivations, get revenge for Pyrrha. Why are Ren and Nora traveling with RWBY? Because they're on Jean's team, and that's it. Why is Yang going to Haven? To find her sister. Okay, she did that. Now what? Team RWBY have goals that are as simple as find a person or go over there. Jean's the only one in the main cast to have a long-term goal to work toward. Jean being our focus has meant we lost out on time that could have been dedicated toward Team RWBY's friendship or their other relationships. Jean has had multiple arcs, while RWBY hasn't developed since Volume 1, and Yang keeps getting stunted on her screen time. Team RWBY's development suffers while Jean is given plenty of opportunities to grow. It's gotten to the point that whenever Jean does something noteworthy or important, I can't help but groan and roll my eyes. I'm tired of never getting to see our main characters be featured like how Jean does. Now, while Jean is the most prominent imposter protagonist protagonist, he isn't the only one. The second one is Crow. Similar to Jean, Crow started off really well. He had a lot of cool build-up that led to a pretty unimpressive reveal. He's strong and smart, being someone others could turn to for help in a fight, and able to offer new lore and history. He didn't focus on what the kids were up to, instead sticking to his assignments. But he is still a good role model for his nieces, and offers advice when needed. He's the perfect mentor figure, only appearing when necessary. Until Volume 4. Crow was fine as long as it was assumed he wouldn't stick around. A hyper-competent relative to save the kids and give them encouragement who inevitably leaves until he's needed again. But that's not really what happened. Instead of focusing on the kids as they traveled, we were stuck with Crow, seeing how he was doing. Why let us see the kids chit-chat in Higanbana when watching Crow vaguely talk around information with Raven is a much better option. Crow then thrusts himself into one of the most noteworthy fights of the volume. We don't get to see Ranger work around this challenging new opponent. We have to watch already established as a good fighter Crow fight Tyrion. Even once RWBY was given the chance to grow from her mistakes when she chose to continue fighting, it was all instead meant to service Crow. RWBY needs to learn that she shouldn't always fight just because she can? No, RWBY did nothing wrong. It was all meant to exemplify Crow's edgy semblance. Crow's illness then becomes a major factor in the volume, not in service to give RWBY some urgency or something to worry about, but just as an excuse to facilitate Ren's arc. Crow's sick, so we have to go through Kuro Yuri. Volume 5 has whole sections where we exclusively follow Crow. He gets to make discoveries and is given the authority within the group. He's gone from being a sporadic mentor to the de facto leader of the kids. They refer to him, he gets screen time all to himself. Team RWBY slowly come back together throughout the volume, but rather than dedicate the bulk of their screen time to developing their character dynamics or having them struggle with their hardships, we get whole scenes dedicated to Crow wandering the town, or going over plans and lore with Oscar. Having Crow and Oscar drop exposition on us is considered more important than watching our main cast cope with the uprooting of their lives. Which leads me to our final imposter protag, Oscar. Unlike the other two, Oscar was introduced as a new protagonist. He's the first non-villain we see in Volume 4, taking precedent over even RWBY. There were 5 main arcs in Volume 4. Weiss's arc, Blake's arc, Yang's arc, Ren's arc, and Oscar's arc. Oscar's scenes are the most evenly spread out of the volume, keeping him in the spotlight while also dedicating more time to him than other characters. Yang's arc was front-loaded. Ren's arc was only in the last 3 episodes. Oscar appears consistently and frequently. Oscar is presented to us much like a protagonist would be. He's a common everyman with greatness and power thrust upon him. He sounds like he should star in some other shonen manga. He was introduced to immediately be pushed into the main cast, and with Ozpin in his head, he's rocketed up into important character status immediately. He's the only one presented to us with a latent power greater than RWBY's Silver Eye so far. He's young, naive, innocent, and powerful. He's everything they've already tried to do with RWBY. Oscar gets to have freakouts while RWBY calmly retells the death of her friends. Ozpin gets to spend extended scenes going over his powers, backstory, and motivations, while the rest of the cast are just stuck sitting there listening to him. Oscar, Crow, and Jean are active, where everyone else is passive. Crow looks for answers and spends time protecting the kids. Oscar and Ozpin make all the plans while also being super competent on the battlefield. Jean gets scenes of him training, he initiates combat with Cinder, he heals and saves Weiss. Now what about our actual protagonists? Yang got attacked by bandits. She asked for Raven to fix her problems. Blake got ambushed. She chose to let Adam escape. Weiss followed orders until she lost her privileges. She got kidnapped and only chose to escape once it became clear her sister wouldn't come save her. RWBY was told to practice her hand-to-hand combat. Her eyes activated without her input, and then she got knocked out. Even the climax of Volume 5, Cinder and Raven get the big fight of the volume. We don't get to see Team RWBY work together upstairs, spending that time with Jean's semblance instead. Yang confronted her mom so Raven could conclude her arc. Yang didn't grow from the experience her mom did. Yang didn't even get the relic by her own volition. Ozpin was the one who told the kids to start collecting them. Team RWBY has to keep taking a backseat for both character development and story progression, while the imposter protags are growing and making an impact on the story. Our main characters have been deprived of the time they need to become fully fleshed out, and now it's to the point they don't seem to be able to support the show on their own. If we only followed RWBY, Weiss, Blake, and Yang for Volume 6, I don't think they would have what it takes to hold the story together. They would have to immediately jump into some development arcs, because as they are now, the girls are just walking tropes and ideals. They are weak characters in this world where Jean, Crow, and Oscar take it upon themselves to get involved in the story. Our protagonists have suffered a lack of development, with our title character being unchanged since her first arc. With the show's 6th volume and 67th episode approaching, that's a shame. Our main 4 girls should be solidly established and should have an active role in the plot, but they haven't had the chance with the screen time being divvied out to seemingly more worthy characters. I would hope that Team RWBY will take the stage for the next volume. I'd like to see the girls really develop and start making an active difference in the plot. I want to see them be the centered focus for the show. But something's telling me that doesn't seem likely.